So Jerry finished up chapter 3, and we're going to start into chapter 4 tonight. Again, chapter 3, the pivotal thing in chapter 3 is what?
Must be born again.
Huh?
He must be born again.
Must be born again, Nicodemus, right? So that's kind of always a good, Nick, the story of Nicodemus, John chapter 3, kind of burn that in your brain. You can always find it, go back, then all the things about being born again. And plus, the things that y'all discovered last time is all these statements about Jesus. Again, John kind of recalls John the Baptist as this witness again, and he says all these things about Christ. And we see again the humility of John. He must increase, verse 30, he must increase that I must decrease. That John's testimony is valid. He's a good witness because he doesn't have anything to gain from it. In fact, Jesus being the Christ is going to cause John to lose in the sense of his popularity, his following, those kind of things. So he is a good witness. And so John in the letter brings him back again to kind of remind us what John is still saying about Jesus, and still, as things are progressing here, he's still pointing toward Jesus and against himself. All right, so in chapter 4, really changed gears. And to me, this is kind of where you get the meat of the book of John a little bit. I think the first 3 chapters are kind of just like this, almost this introduction in a sense. But chapter 4, we now start getting in these sections where Jesus interfacing with people, and these bigger discourses that John's famous for, is he talks to people and interfaces with groups of people, usually based on a miracle. And this kind of is, but a little bit different. So in chapter 4, verse 1, now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. So why would what the Pharisees think about what Jesus is doing matter as far as where Jesus is going to go, where's he going to teach, what's he going to be involved in? Why would that even impact that at all, do you think?
It's not his time yet for them to take him, and then he knows that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, so the implication is if he stays there now and keeps putting it in the face of the Jews, that they're going to want to do something sooner than what he's ready for. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And that's what John's kind of saying. So it's not that the Pharisees are running Jesus's campaign here or running his ministry. It's Jesus has a plan that he's carrying out from his Father, and he's recognizing the realities of on the ground. Now, could God stop them from taking him miraculously to accomplish that? Sure, he could have. But God providentially now, or just through, you could even say nothing to do even with providence, Jesus just looking at the situation and saying, you know what, better let things cool down here before things get heated up too much. So he's in control of the situation. He's handling things. Sometimes he'll handle miraculously, but a lot of times just through good judgment and good wisdom, as far as he knows the end goal, what they're trying to accomplish and how they're going to accomplish it. So I think that's the idea. What's the other thing here about why did Jesus not baptize people? Why does he make that point here, do you think, in John?
It doesn't say.
Yeah, it doesn't say, does it? So you have to speculate on this one. Why might that be, Justin?
I'm thinking about First Corinthians, and what they said. If you had been baptized by Jesus,
Yeah,
right? Like what a claim you would have. So no one can claim that. No one could be like, Jesus himself baptized me. I'm the most disciple that there is.
yeah. I think that seems to be. I think we could speculate that's probably the reason that Jesus actually baptizing somebody would have too much sway over. Well, we need to listen to him. Jesus baptized him more than anybody else. You already hear that people even today still criticizing Paul, right? Because he's not one of the original 12. And so, well, Paul wrote that. That's not what Peter said or one of the other apostles said. Paul has to defend that in his own life. So imagine, again, like good point, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, if they were already puffed up about Paul baptizing him, what would they thought about if Jesus had baptized him? Yeah, anything. I think that's the only thing I can think of is why that would even come up or why it would matter. And again, there'd be, if Jesus did baptize, what we know though from 1 Corinthians 1 is it wouldn't have mattered, would it? They wouldn't have been more whatever. Their sins wouldn't have been more forgiven if Jesus would have been doing the baptizing. And so with any of these people, other than John baptizing people that we know about generally, we don't know who was actually doing the baptizing. So does that give us a clue as a little bit about how we should look at what's the emphasis on? If it's not on the person doing the baptizing, where's the emphasis?
Person being baptized,
Yeah.
Jesus.
what they believe, what they've done.
You don't think about that much until you start. I mean, I used to never think about who did the baptizing, but that comes up a lot in situations where are kind of unique, like prison, and this we've talked about this. You have to be baptized in the name of Jesus. Think about what that does. That puts authority on and responsibility on the person doing the baptizing and shifts it away from the person getting baptized. In other words, the person doing the baptizing has to say certain things. And we even think sometimes, they have to believe certain things, a person baptizing, and we just really don't see that anywhere. It doesn't mean that if we had our choice, we'd certainly, I think, be more comfortable somebody baptizing us that understood why we're doing it, what we're all about. But you just don't see any emphasis, any commentary, anything like that in the New Testament about the person doing the baptizing. You see the emphasis on the heart, the change in the person being baptized. So I just think that's kind of an aside there, but it reminds me of that as we do it. Now, what's significant about Samaria? So they're going down to Samaria or going through Samaria. So heading north from Judea up through Samaria to Galilee. So what's the significance about Samaria? We see this through the story, but I think a little bit of background kind of helps. Anybody want to tell us why the Samaritans are significant? Ken?
They were sort of inbreds when Assyria conquered. The Assyrians inbred with the Jews, and those that returned were descendants of them.
Okay.
They were seen as outsiders.
Yeah, so really probably the opposite of inbreeding. Inbreeding is only breeding within a species or a genetic group. Yeah, they were outbred.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, so
My
turn.
brain is old brain.
No, I understand. All right, turn to 2 Kings 17. And this is really the only specific thing that we have in reference to this. We're forced to draw some conclusions, I think, based on 2 Kings 17, is what we read about in John 4. But again, it's important to see this and understand why is this even a problem? Because think about the land of Samaria is smack dab in the middle of what?
Israel.
Yeah, of Israel, the promised land. I mean, it's right in the middle of the promised land. So you would assume that there are just Jews everywhere in the promised land, right? So when we get to 2 Kings 17, and we now, as we're talking, this is the in chapter 17 talks about in verse 6, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria. All right, so we're in the time of the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So Samaria is occupied by who before this? By who?
Nation of Israel.
The nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, right? And they've split up, right, since the time of Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam stays in Judah. Jeroboam runs and leads this rebellion against Rehoboam, David's grandson. And so Jeroboam and the nation of Israel never does what for the next 100 and some odd years or whatever? They never do what? Follow God. There's never a righteous king in Israel. Every one of them are idolaters. So Ahab maybe being the most famous, but Jehu, just a bunch of bad kings. That's all you see. So in chapter 17 is when God finally has decided that he's going to judge them, and they're no longer going to be part of Israel. They're going to be taken over by Assyria. And so that's what he talks about in 17. And he talks about is because in verse 7, And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God and had brought them out of the land of Egypt under the hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and had feared other gods and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. So they, in verse 9, and the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. They built for themselves high places in all their towns, etc., etc. He goes into great detail about what had happened. So God is judging the northern kingdom. So this area that we think of Samaria or Israel is now going to be taken over by Assyria. So if you get down to verse 24, he says this, and the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cuta, Abba, Hamath, Seraphim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel. So he takes most of the people of Israel captive into Assyria, and he replaces it with his own people. So there's this mass migration that happens, which war does in a lot of cases in the history of man. So almost, not all, but almost all the Israelites leave, and then they bring in their own people because they don't want rebellion. They don't want them reconnecting with Judah, as you can think about, because Assyria thinks they're going to take Judah too. Now, God doesn't let them do that. But in the next chapter with Hezekiah, they're going to go and try to take Jerusalem. So the king of Syria is smart, so he brings in his own people. Now that seems like it's a good idea, and they take possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. Now, verse 25. At the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord, the people that came over. Therefore, the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria did not know that the law of the God of the land. Therefore, he sent lions among them and killed. Behold, they are killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land. Now, I don't know how they know that. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe that's not what happened, but they're assuming that the reason the lions are killing all the people is because God, the God of the land, their God, is not pleased with this. So that's what they assume. So look at their solution. Verse 27. Then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there and teach them the law of the God of the land. The problem with that is what?
Priest of Israel.
Yeah. So is this really a priest of Levi? Is it really? Or is it a priest of one of the gods they served? I don't know. Doesn't mean there were look, just because Samaria as a whole, the nation is full of idolatry, it doesn't mean there weren't individuals living there that weren't. And it doesn't mean there weren't some priests that actually lived there that were still faithful to God. So it seems like this priest, at least in the eyes of the king of Syria, would have had some knowledge of the law that they were supposed to follow in the land and not just one of these other gods. But we don't really know. But that's how, though, that if this priest is a priest of God, which I think when we get to John, we kind of, I think, would assume that now this priest is bringing in and going to teach the people on some level the laws of God, but mixed in with what? Idolatry. So imagine that they're teaching you all about the gods of the Syrians, but they're also teaching you about the laws of God. And that while you live in this land, there's some of these laws of God that you need to follow. To what extent they followed it, we don't know. We get a little hint maybe in John, but they're on some level following the law, and they're being taught the law. So that seems to be how this connection carries all the way through the New Testament. And again, they're influenced by Judah. Judah stayed faithful to God generally, although they go to captivity. But over time, Judah's re-inhabited after they come back from Babylonian captivity. So there is influence. It's not like they live 1,000 miles from each other. There's this influence, but they are considered from this point forward different. They're considered to be Assyrians, but Jewish too on some level. And so you see why when we get to John 4, why this problem arises and how they view the Samaritans. Did you have anything, Justin?
Yeah, I don't think they were influenced by Judah, because I don't think Judah wanted anything to do with them.
Well, that's true.
Like, that's the thing. And what's interesting as I'm reading this again is God did not have to do this. God intentionally created a problem that required the teaching of the law. Maybe so this Samaritan woman would have enough foundation to believe in the Messiah when he showed up, right? Like he didn't owe anything. That the land doesn't matter. He didn't owe anything to Abraham or anybody to make sure that the law is followed on that square patch of land.
Right.
He did this with a further view that he wanted to make sure that the people there would know something. Because they could have just been idolatrous and know nothing about him. They'd have been like the Greeks. But God did this with a plan farther ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. It could be that God's got the Samaritans in mind one day when Jesus is going to be here, the foreknowledge of God and God's plan working out. I don't think that's a stretch by any way of the imagination to think that. And it's interesting because, again, without this, I think the understanding of the Samaritans in the New Testament would be very difficult to figure out what exactly, how did that work? But this does give us the background. Now, obviously, though, they would still be involved in idolatry. And he goes on to say that, verse 27, the king of Syria said, send the priests, we read that, 28. So one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. So on some level, he taught them about Jehovah. Now, you wouldn't think you need to teach them at all. They're Israelites that were originally there. But remember, these people have been moved in. They don't know anything about God. At least some of them don't. Now, again, every single Israelite did not get shipped to Assyria. But overall, they shipped them out. And so these people are coming in and they're like, we don't want to get eaten by lions. So tell us what to do. So they were motivated, I think, to serve the God of the land because the lions were eating them, and their conclusion was this is why the lions are eating us. But then, too, you think about one priest. He didn't send 50 priests. He sends one priest to do that. And what happens when he dies? There doesn't seem to be any plan. Well, later on, Assyria loses its power. Babylon's in control. But I think Justin's right. What we're seeing here is this foundation laid for how things could happen in John chapter 4. And how God, think about one man coming and teaching the law opens up the avenue for Jesus to teach people about who he is in John chapter 4. It really is a cool thread, the connection here between these two. Just a couple of verses, verse 29. But every nation still made gods of its own and put them in the shrines of the high places that the Samaritans had made, every nation in the cities of which they lived. And if you go on and read that, they were still even involved in child sacrifice and some really evil things. But then you go down to verse 33. So they feared the Lord, but also served their own gods after the manner of the nations among whom they had been carried out. And it says, to verse 34, to this day they do according to the former manner. They do not fear the Lord, and they do not follow the statutes, the rules, the law, the commandments that the Lord commanded the children of Jacob. So you could say on one hand they feared the Lord, but on the other hand they didn't fear the Lord because they just lumped God in Jehovah with all these other gods. So that's the people that are there then. Now let's go back to John 4. So that's the background of this woman that Jesus is going to meet, or this area of Samaria. So when it says, again in John 4, verse 4, he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. Verse 8, for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Well, here's the reason. They hate the Samaritans because they see the Samaritans as supplanting their people in Samaria back from the Assyrians. They don't look at the Samaritans anymore like they would just a fellow Jew. They look at them on some level that they're not exactly like a Gentile, but they're not exactly like a Jew either. They're this hybrid, we could say, or even a lot of them may not have Jewish roots, but they still claim to follow and be followers of the law of the Lord because of what was taught to them. So how all that mixes in together or not, we just don't know. But that's the situation. So she is astounded that he would even talk to her. Man versus woman, we think about the cultural parts of that. But you, a Jew, and John tells us, because everybody's not going to understand this that reads John. And so he says, hey, look, the Jews don't have any dealings with the Samaritans. So a Jew would not normally say to a Samaritan woman, even if he was thirsty, give me a drink of water. Think about it. It's like, you're thirsty. Why wouldn't you say that to somebody? But it's like, I don't even going to talk to you because you're such a bad group of people. Now, idolatry generally has been removed from the land compared to what it was back when we read Kings. The Jews themselves, Judah is not involved in idolatry anymore. And even up in the Samaritan area, that we don't ever read about them being entrenched in idolatry the way they were. Is there idolatry around? Sure, because it's connected with the Roman Empire and things like that. And we're going to see Jesus deals with that sometime in his ministry. But whether it doesn't seem like they're involved in deliberate idolatrous worship, it's just they're following kind of their own way of doing things, this own tradition. They look at themselves differently than the Jews do. They're kind of caught in the middle. They don't see themselves necessarily as just normal Gentiles, but yet they know that they're not exactly like the Jews either. But she looks at this well as our father Jacob gave us this well. She sees herself as a descendant of Jacob. And that's important. I think that plays into all this. All right, so for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans, verse 10, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. What a response. So why does Jesus answer her this way? What's he trying to do? This is typical Jesus right here. What's he trying to elicit from her?
More questions.
More questions. Is there any way she could have understood what he said? There's just no way. There's no way. Now, what's John talking about? He says, Jesus answered, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. What's Jesus referring to? If you'd have known the gift of God.
Is there?
I think it's Jesus talking about himself. Does anybody think something different there? I mean, it's possible it could be something else. But if you knew I'm the gift of God, and what else? If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink of water. So is he saying if you knew the gift of God, if you were expecting the gift of God? Because we're going to see in a minute that she was expecting the gift of God. Is he saying if you knew the gift of God, and that she's going to basically say, I do know the gift of God, but she doesn't know who it is that's the gift of God. Because she's going to talk about the idea of a Messiah. And that's the gift of God. And so is he saying, if you knew the gift of God, if you knew that God was going to send a Messiah, well, guess what? She does know that. They've been taught that. So think about it. This priest that comes into the land, and through all this period of time, we're going to see there is an expectation among the Samaritans of a Messiah. Now, maybe they got that all the way back from the promise to Abraham, and they understood there's going to be this one seed of Abraham that's going to bless the whole world. But they have some expectation of God, maybe not to the extent that the Jews have, but some. And so maybe the gift of God is, do you have an expectation that God's going to send the Messiah? And then do you know who you're talking to? Because if you did, he says what?
You asked me.
You'd ask me for what?
Living water.
Living water. What's living water?
Eternal life.
Huh?
Eternal life.
Eternal life?
Connection with God.
Connection with God? Okay. Huh?
Salvation.
Salvation? Okay. Why don't we know what living water is exactly?
Because he doesn't explain it.
Because Jesus doesn't explain it. It's going to. But this idea of living water has not come up yet in the New Testament. Jesus and John is the one that introduces this idea of living water. Now, this is going to be big because there is a lot of Old Testament reference to the living water. I really want to talk about the living water specifically more in John 6 and 7, because I think that's where he carries the same theme over. But just real quick, go back to Isaiah real quick. I think it's Isaiah 52. Let me look. Isaiah 53, but I think I'd rather look at, I think, Isaiah 41. Again, there's several places, and we're going to connect when we get to John 6 and 7, Zechariah 14, because that's where it's connected to the Feast of Booths, and that's the kind of the idea there. Isaiah 41 says this in verse 17. Again, this idea of water. When the poor and the needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the Lord, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on the bare heights and fountains in the midst of the valleys, and I will make the wilderness a pool of water, and dry land springs of water. And I will put in the wilderness the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle, the olive, and I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane, and the pine together, that men may see and know and may consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this, the Holy One of Israel has created it. Greg talked a lot about this in the Isaiah class, about using this idea of desert versus water. So what God says is, once you have what? I'll provide water. Once you have what? Thirst. Once you are thirsty, I'll provide water. Will I provide just a little bit of water? The deserts are going to, the only one of these trees that I know of specifically is the cypress tree down in verse 19. And I can tell you where you see cypress trees growing is where, Billy? Where do cypress trees grow? In the swamp. That's right. Cypress tree doesn't grow out in the desert. So when you talk about bringing the cypress trees into the swamp, that means the desert's going to become so plentiful with water that a cypress tree could grow there. So the idea of God providing, but what do we have to provide? Thirst. Desire. And so when he says, if you knew the gift, I could provide you with living water, then what's to stop her from having living water? What's the limiting factor?
Desire.
Her desire. Jesus is going to provide enough water. God's going to provide enough water. The only problem is you got to see that you're thirsty and you need the living water. You got to desire the living water. If you desire the living water, then I will provide it for you. But if you don't have the thirst, you won't get the water. Go ahead, Justin.
But he already knows that she's messed up, because she wouldn't be here at this time of day by herself if there weren't already some problems going on in her life. Whether he knows at this time the situation with her husband's, but at this time he knows just by observation, your life's not going great. You would not be here right now if your life was going great.
So physically, what she's showing by being there, connected back to Isaiah. Thirst. I need water. Why else am I going to walk all the way out here in the middle of the day to get water? I recognize I need water, and so I'm coming to Jacob's well, dug by Jacob, God's servant, the provider of water, physical water. So I'm thirsty. I go to Jacob's well to get the water. Do you see how Jesus is playing on that? Again, connected to Isaiah. You recognize your physical thirst, but do you recognize the thirst for the gift of God? Do you recognize the gift for living water? That's what he's trying to introduce to her. There's no way she's going to get it right away. But the Jews should get it. They should know the connection. The other passage I want is Isaiah 55. So flip over to Isaiah 55 if you're still in 41 there. And this is what he says. And this carries the idea of thirst. What's the real thirst? She can't get her mind off of water. We're going to read again in a second. But he's trying to connect her to the prophecies about Jesus and how Jesus is going to provide water in the desert. If his people thirst, he'll provide it for them. So then in Isaiah 55, verse 1, he says this, come everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, he who has no money. So same connection there like Isaiah 41. If you thirst, come to the waters. If you're thirsty, come to the waters. If you're not thirsty, you're not going to go to the water. You're not going to the well in the middle of the day if you're not physically thirsty. So what we have to ask ourselves is, okay, do I see that I'm thirsty and I need the water that only God can provide? But look how we get that water here. So come everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, he who has no money. So it's not dependent on you to have anything except what? Thirst. And then he says, come buy meat. Come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money, without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligently and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. So it sounds like he's talking about a meal, a physical meal. Then look what he says in verse 3. Incline your ear and come to me. Hear that your soul may live, and I will make you with an everlasting covenant, my steadfast sure love for David. How do we come and get this water? By doing what? Listening. We come with a thirst, a desire to know something that we don't know. So thirst in this case is I'm ignorant. I don't have all the answers. I can't figure things out. If I have that mindset, I don't know the answers. I need something. I'm thirsty. Then I come and he says, I'll give you everything you want, but you drink with your ears. You don't drink with your mouth. That's what Jesus is introducing to her. I think the same idea that's carried forward from Isaiah, and also there's some passages in Jeremiah that speak in a similar way. But what we need to see from this, I think, is the idea of just listening to the story of the Samaritan woman is I have to have a mindset anytime I come to Jesus that I'm thirsty and he's the only one that can fill me up. And if I'm going to get that thirst, it doesn't happen with me talking. It has to do with me listening. I have to have a heart, have to have ears that are willing to take in the water. And God said, what? Will I give you just enough to make it? Will I give you just a few trickles? No, we go back to chapter 41. He says, guess what? I'll give you enough that the desert will grow cypress trees. You want to come listen to me? You want to open your heart and recognize you're thirsty? I can just fill you up with everything. So Jesus here calls it living water. But again, I think it's that connection to the eye. Why? Because this water is going to give you life in a way that other water couldn't. So look what he says in verse 11. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Is she just dumb?
She's thirsty.
And she's got no other frame of reference. She didn't come out there to go see the Messiah. She came to get some water. But Jesus uses this to test her to say, are you really thirsty? Or do you just come out here every day just to get water? Do you really know about the gifts of God? Or do you just come out every day to get some water to drink? Is this the sustenance of your life? Come out here every day and get some physical water. Is that what your life consists of? You ever ask yourself that? Is that what life is? We go to work every day. We earn a check every week. We have the weekend and life starts over again. Is that what life is? Is it just about doing the mundane things to live, to survive? Or are we thirsty for something more? See, we're looking for people that want more than just what they can get from their job and even from their family and from their hobbies and from their entertainment. We're looking for people that say, what? I have all that stuff, and we all have that stuff. But he's looking for people that say, I'm not satisfied with that. There's got to be more to life than this. Don't we meet people like that all the time? They have the stuff. They have everything they need, but they're barren. They're thirsty. And they don't even know it. She doesn't know it. She doesn't know that she's dying of thirst, even though she can go out to this well every day. So she responds in a way that could. As we go through John, though, I want you to remember back to this story because her problem is what? She thinks everything Jesus is saying has a physical reality, and he's trying to talk to her about spiritual things. Go ahead, Justin.
But he made it really easy for her to say, okay, whatever. Like, at this moment, it would have, if she had no thirst, she'd have been like, whatever, crazy Jew, I'm going back home, right? I'm gonna get my water, I'm gonna go. I'm not getting you a drink, not doing anything like that. But there's enough of her that does thirst that she continues this conversation with him till she finally gets to where the living water is. And that kind of like response from people shows us, like, are they really interested or not interested? You want to talk about deep things, or are you happy with the stuff?
And that's excellent. And so what we see, the contrast is when he goes to the Jews, what do we find out they are happy with?
Stuff.
The stuff, their position, their power, their place, their rank. John 12, some didn't confess him because they were afraid to get kicked out of the synagogue. They let the praise of men more than the praise of God. You see, we get all these people that Jesus approaches in similar ways, strange questions, different situations. What are you looking for? We're going to see that with the blind man. What are you looking for? Is it just physical healing? Is that all you cared about? And so the questioning is to reveal is, are you really thirsty? I think that's a great way to think about it, Justin. Are you really thirsty? So she can say you're just a crazy Jew, and that's what some people say. You're just a blasphemer. You're just some lunatic out here doing this stuff. But then other people stay engaged in the conversation honestly. That's what she does. She says, hey, where are you going to get the living water, guy? That sounds interesting, and I'm all for it, but where are you going to get it? And so he says in verse 12, are you greater than our father? Or she continues to say, are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. What's the limitation of the well of Jacob? Yeah, think about it. What's the limitation of its value to you?
You'll be thirsty again.
Yeah, you'll be thirsty again, but you got to go walk out to the well every day and go get the water. You can't carry the water with you in the sense of other than what you can physically carry. And guess what? What happens by the next day? You're out again. So you're physically limited to how much water you can transport from the well of Jacob. Now, we don't see that. We think, we'll just hook up a pump and pump it into town, then we'll solve that problem. But that's not how they could do it. That's not the reality that they were existing in. So he said, you can't be greater than Jacob. What are you going to do? Build us a well in town? Are you going to haul the water for us? Think about all the things that might run through her mind. Are you greater than Jacob? Jacob's great. Why? What did he do?
Well,
He dug the well. He provided for us physical water. How could you be greater than that? And so verse 13, Jesus said, are you greater than our father Jacob? 12, he gave us the well and drank from himself, as did his sons and his livestock. In other words, think about how long's that well been in existence? Over 1,500 years. That's a pretty good well. You know, that 1,500 year well, Jacob did a really good job. He dug a well that's lasted 1,500 years. He said, are you greater than that? And not only did it provide enough water just for us, because think about it, every well didn't provide enough water for everybody. It ran out. It had to wait for the groundwater to seep back in. Now, Jacob's well could provide for the people around plus livestock. It was even greater. So verse 13, Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. There's so much there. What does water there represent?
physical,
Huh?
physical water.
Physical water, but what else? Broaden it.
Religion,
Your hopeful state.
family heritage system.
Stuff.
What else? Huh?
Your earthly existence.
Yeah. It's anything that never satisfies until I go back and do it again. Think about it. I have a note in my Bible. This is the verse for addiction. Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. You chase an addiction, you chase a drug, you're going to get high right now, but guess what you're going to have to do? Go do it again. You go get water every day and you got water, but guess what you got to do the next day? You got to go do it again. What is it in life that you can't pursue that you're like, guess what? We got to do that again. You ever think about that when you do laundry? What's the point? I know, Sam, I know you think about this doing that crew's laundry, especially Clint. Why am I doing this? What's Clint going to do when you put it in his drawer, Samantha? Yeah, that bump. Can you believe that? That ungrateful joker. He's going to put it on and wear it and get it dirty again. Guess what? So every time you do laundry, you're like, you know what? Guess what? I'm going to do it this time. And guess what's going to happen 3 days from now? I'm going to do it again. Or dishes. Or just everything in life. You know, you're like, okay, I'm hot. I go get cooled off. Well, guess what? You go back outside. What's going to happen? You're getting hot again. You have to cool off again. This really, to me, summarizes life. When we only thirst for the satisfaction of what this life does, whatever that is, emotionally, physically, whatever, then the reality is in this life, you're going to thirst again. You go to the doctor because you're sick. Guess what's going to happen at some point in the future? You're going to get sick again. And you're going to have to go to the doctor again. You know what happens every time you get a haircut a few weeks later? Well, Clint, you don't have to worry about this, but your hair grows back and you got to get it cut again. And that's what she's saying. Is this what your life is? That you're just going to go drink water? Everyone who drinks this water will thirst again. What is it in life that you can do, that you enjoy, that you love, that you like, that at some point you're like, you know what? It's just doing it all again. It's like manna out in the wilderness for 40 years. Guess what we get to eat tomorrow? Manna. Again? Yeah, again. And I think what Jesus is trying to say, if you can see life that way, you know what you're going to crave? What? Something better. Something better than just the same thing every day. The same disappointments, the same heartache, the same hardship. Imagine going to have to draw water every day. That's hard. And so Jesus says, guess what? You drew the water today, you're going to have to come back again, because whoever drinks this water is going to thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty forever. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The water that I will give you will produce in you what? Water. How is the desert going to be filled by God with water? People are going to fill it with water. How's the earth, it's a desert, going to be filled with water, y'all? Through who? Through us. You see, that's the fulfillment of Isaiah. In a sense, Jesus is filling the desert, but really, in a sense, he's not directly. He's filling it by using us. He didn't say, I'll come and provide all the living water. No, I'll give you living water, and that will produce within you a fountain that wells up of living water. You're going to be not only the receiver of the living water, you're going to be the new source of the living water. So we have to see it is our responsibility to fulfill what he said in Isaiah 55 and Isaiah 41. We're the ones that make the land that's desolate, that's barren, able to grow cypress trees. By carrying the living water that's within us out to the world and providing what? The fulfillment of their thirst. And all they're going to do is listen to us as we tell them what the message of Jesus is. We're the ones filling the desert with water. I think that's the idea he's trying to do. Real quick, she's going to say, verse 15, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water again. You got to love this woman because she's very practical, right? She's very like, okay, I'll take it. Why? Because in her mind, what? It's going to relieve her how? Physically, yeah. It's going to take that burden away. But Jesus is trying to relieve a burden that she didn't even think about right now. All right. We'll pick up there, verse 15 or 16 next time. Thank you.